High protein diets have been praised for fat loss, but what if I told you they may not work the way that you expect? Hey guys, welcome back to the Obesity Project. Today, episode 15. Does protein hurt or help when it comes to weight loss? So, is protein good for weight loss or is it bad? So, the science may actually surprise you on this one. So again, my name is Dr. Mark Shankman. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon that went on my own personal weight loss journey. And I started to think about this in my clinical practice today, that although the reason that I decided to talk about obesity is because of my personal journey, because the medical profession gets it all wrong in many cases, although there is some little bit of turnaround involved in the medical profession now. But really, I also started thinking about how does this affect my daily practice of oral and maxillofacial surgery? And what I realized is when we talk about diets, when we talk about complex carbs, when we talk about protein and fat and refined carbs versus whole foods and things like that, we are actually talking about things that are near and dear to me. So a diet that is very low in carbohydrate is very low in sugar. Very low in sugar means less decay or less caries, which is the medical definition of decay or a cavity. And so this is actually something that is relevant to my own practice. So getting back to our subject of protein, so protein is the golden child of weight loss, but is it really as powerful as we actually think? High protein diets have been praised for fat loss, but what if I told you they may not work the way that you expect? So let's go ahead and break down the science behind protein, insulin, and weight loss, because it's not just about eating more steak. Now, a sort of context for that, and I mentioned this in the last video, I am starting this Friday, so today is Monday. Starting this Friday, I actually will be starting a carnivore diet. I will let you know about my experience and what I'm going through, some of the challenges on starting a carnivore diet. We'll go into all of that stuff, but let's talk about not just eating more steak, but on protein in general. So a quick sort of brief overview of how protein became the weight loss hero. So back in the 90s, carbs were finally identified as major drivers of obesity. And as we mentioned in previous videos, that in the 70s, in the late 70s, 1977 in particular, the food pyramid was created by the Department of Agriculture in the U.S., actually by the Department of Agriculture. And they, sort of recommended this high carb diet. Well, in the 90s, carbs finally were identified as the major driver of obesity. And this led to the rise of many different low carb diets, starting with Dr. Atkins back in the 1970s, late 70s. So many thought that if carbs actually go ahead and make us fat, then protein must be the answer. So high protein diets surged in popularity as a result of that belief. But did they actually help people lose weight? And here's actually what the research shows. So studies showed that high protein diets were effective in the short term, but didn't necessarily lead to long-term fat loss. And protein, while it was assumed to be sort of almost free calories because it boosts metabolism and reduces hunger, was that really the whole story? And the answer is no, that's not the story. So let's get into the science on protein, on insulin, and the incretin effect. So protein and insulin. Wait, are you telling me that protein spikes insulin? And I'm here to tell you the answer, unfortunately, is yes. So insulin is not just triggered by carbs, by carbohydrate, but certain proteins will also cause insulin to rise. And so we need to really look at something called the insulin index. And the insulin index talks about how high insulin jumps as a result of different food products. Now, as I mentioned in the glycemic index, That was really only for carbohydrates, didn't sort of factor in any proteins or fats, whereas the insulin index does describe all foods. And so what we found, like I had something to do with it. I'm just reporting on it. But what the researchers found with the insulin index is that dairy, certain types of dairy products, especially whey protein, triggers very high insulin responses. And things like lean meats, like chicken or fish, sort of counterintuitively also stimulate insulin secretion, which you really wouldn't expect. Um, and sometimes even higher than expected levels. So, why does this matter? As I mentioned previously, if insulin drives fat storage, then protein, not as innocent as we once thought. And this is coming from someone who plans on being on a carnivore diet in just a few days. So we have to talk about another effect, and this is the incretin effect. Why protein still might actually be a benefit. So protein, as I've mentioned previously, does trigger some gut hormones. Particularly, I've mentioned protein YY, which is a satiety hormone, but we haven't really touched much on these others, which is GLP-1. You may be familiar with the term GLP-1 because many of the injectable drugs like Ozempic and many of the other ones, there's semaglutide and I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, but all these GLP-1 agonists, what they do is the GLP-1 is released by the gut and gets into the bloodstream and tells the brain that, oh, we've had enough to eat, and it reduces appetite and increases satiety. So this is why high protein meals really are much more effective at keeping you fuller for longer compared to carb heavy meals. However, one downside is the incretins also increase insulin secretion, which leads to this sort of mixed effect on weight loss. So we have to factor in incretin into the mix, and we can't just focus solely on insulin by itself or the effect of the satiety hormones. So when we talk about the protein satiety and the hormonal obesity theory, we have to take certain things into account. So we have to talk about satiety versus insulin, and we have to talk about animal versus plant proteins. So when it comes to satiety versus insulin, protein does increase satiety, which of course will help you with calorie control or the amount of food that you're taking in. Obviously, the more satiated, the more full you feel, the sooner you're going to stop eating, which will essentially create this, control in calorie intake. But it also raises insulin, which could contribute to the fat storage that I mentioned previously. So there's sort of a counterbalance effect to protein. Then when we look at animal versus plant proteins, animal proteins like meat, eggs, dairy do seem to stimulate insulin more than plant-based proteins. So for all my vegetarian and vegan friends, I know they're smiling ear to ear on this one. But the animal proteins do also provide essential amino acids needed for metabolism that are not provided by plant proteins. So again, even there's sort of a mixed effect. So I'm not here to tell you to do carnivore. I actually haven't done it myself yet. I am here to tell you that, whatever you decide to do as far as a diet goes, you should get into a fat burning mode, which is sort of a ketogenic diet. You can do that as low carb. You can do that as a full keto diet. You can do that as carnivore. You can do that as vegan. You can do that as vegetarian. You can do all of these things, all of these various diets, and there's tons more, paleo and Mediterranean diet, and all of these different diets. But essentially, they all have one thing in common, and that's low carbohydrates, particularly cutting out all the processed, ultra processed food, the refined carbohydrates, which are so dangerous and so damaging. All of these diets all eliminate that. So that's really the story as far as protein and what proteins are best. Or I'm not here to tell you vegetable proteins are better than animal proteins or vice versa. When we get to the protein, when we talk about the protein debate, though, we're talking about meat, dairy, and weight gain. So let's talk about each of those individually. First, I want to discuss meat consumption and obesity. So studies show that high meat intake is not necessarily linked to fat gain, unless, here's the key, here's the important takeaway point, unless paired with refined carbohydrates. When back in the 70s, they demonized saturated fats, which are high in animal protein, they were not taking into account the fact that it's the protein mixed with those refined carbohydrates and the fat in that animal meat that was mixing with the refined carbohydrates that was doing all the damage. So there's no link between high meat intake and fat gain unless it's paired with the refined carbohydrates. The lean meats, things like chicken and fish, like you see in the picture behind me, um, they do raise insulin, but they raise insulin without the sugar spike, which could be good or bad depending on your particular metabolic health. So there's no definite downside to that, and it does certainly depend on where you are. Are you just trying to lose weight? Are you metabolically unhealthy? Do you have type 2 diabetes? All of these things factor in. So let's talk about dairy. Dairy is one of those kind of strange things. Even folks who are on a carnivore diet cannot agree as to whether dairy should be included in a carnivore diet. Some do, some don't. So there are some things that you need to at least keep in mind when it comes to dairy to have the total picture and make a decision for yourself. And that's dairy can be a hidden insulin bomb. So certain dairy proteins or products became products. Certain dairy proteins like whey and like casein trigger significant insulin spikes, even without any sugar, without any carbohydrate. So this may explain why some people do struggle to lose weight on high dairy keto diets. So, for example, drinking a whey protein shake can spike insulin as much as actually eating white bread. So, we do have to be careful on how we take in these proteins, what composition they have, how much fat is mixed in, how much carbohydrate is mixed in, and keeping in mind, insulin spikes, keeping in mind glucose levels. All of these things have to be factored in. So, does protein actually help or hurt weight loss? We haven't really addressed that topic. So here's where protein actually helps. So it does boost satiety. You do naturally eat fewer calories because protein does trigger satiety hormones, which does limit the amount of food that you're taking in. And as opposed to carbohydrates, where there really is no limit, there's no satiation hormone for carbohydrate like there is for protein and fat. So you can easily overeat carbohydrates, especially the refined ones, um, because they've stripped out all of the other products that actually create satiety. So satiety is one factor, and it definitely helps with that. So it does preserve lean muscle mass as well. And this is super important when you're trying to lose fat because you may want to make sure that although you're losing fat, you're not losing lean muscle mass. And there is, I see a dietitian, registered dietitian every week. We talk about this quite frequently that when you lose weight, you're not just losing fat, you're losing fat and non-fat mass, which is muscle and bone and fluid and all these other things. So we do want to see in a perfect world, we want to see at least a 2-to-1 ratio of fat loss to fat-free mass loss, which includes muscle and bone and fluids. So um, you want to make sure it's at least 2-to-1. Ideally, you want 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or even 5-to-1. So the protein does preserve the lean muscle mass, which is important in weight loss. And it does also increase metabolism. So higher thermic effect compared to carbohydrates or fat. So you do get a slight increase in metabolism and your ability to generate heat. So here's where protein might actually hurt. So excessive protein can raise insulin. This may slow down fat loss. Dairy and whey proteins, as I mentioned, may trigger those insulin spikes, leading to unintended fat storage. And if paired, here's where really the main damage is done. If it's paired with particularly refined carbohydrates, protein will not fix those metabolic issues. So you may be asking yourself, then what's the best approach? What do I do? How do I make sense of, this information you just gave me, Dr. Mark? So what we have to do is we have to prioritize whole food proteins like eggs and fish and lean meats. Even though there's some downsides, those are extraordinarily beneficial. We need to limit dairy if you're struggling with weight loss, or let's say you do a carnivore diet or you do a keto diet where you're including dairy and you're losing weight, and all of a sudden you plateau. Then it may be time to look at the dairy a little bit more critically and say, okay, if I haven't reached my weight loss goals, is the dairy slowing me up and is it limiting the effect of the weight loss? So limit dairy if struggling with weight loss due to its insulin response. And we want to balance protein intake. More isn't always better. You can eat too much protein if you're not getting enough of the other things. And one of the things that at least I've learned from studying the carnivore diet is you're getting plenty of protein on a carnivore diet, no question about it. But what's really important is the fat level, and it's not the protein level that's critical, it's actually the fat. And you want that protein to fat ratio to be about a 1 to 1. It's very important to get enough fats in. Usually, if someone goes wrong on carnivore or they go wrong on keto, it's because they're actually eating more protein and not getting enough fat in their diet. So we want to pair those proteins with either fiber if you're eating vegetables or healthy fats in a more carnivore type situation to help stabilize those insulin levels and manage the protein more appropriately. So, did you know that protein could spike insulin? Let me know in the comments below what surprised you the most about this video. And, maybe it was the protein spiked insulin or something else that I covered. And of course, share this with someone who swears by high protein diets that may or may not be overly helpful. So please like, share, and comment. Subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube or any of the social media channels that you can subscribe to my channel. And I appreciate you taking the time as always. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care and good luck on your weight loss journey and continue to follow the Obesity Project. Thank you so much.